last video of this series, we covered various scenarios of the War of the Ring mode, from the very little offered in terms of gameplay value in the vanilla game scenarios, to the much more dynamic overhaul to AOTR's War of the Ring, showing how it incorporated all new heroes, units, and styles of play in the historical Northern and Southern conquest modes. In this video, I'll delve into the details of one of the last two scenarios offered in AOTR's War of the Ring mode, the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. There's a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. The War of the Dwarves and Orcs is a historic scenario you can play either by yourself or with a friend, PvP style. Co-op is off limits in this limited scenario, and you can only play dwarves or goblins. Based loosely on the historic period of the dwarves in the books and seen briefly in the Hobbit films, you need only to try to rally your dwarven allies for vengeance upon Azog for the death of King Thror and to attempt to reclaim Moria. PvP, while interesting, can be a little odd in that the heroes are so different for each side, with their own set of issues, but we'll get into that later in this video. Regardless, it's a great deal of fun, needless to say, to play against a human player in this historical time period at long last. This scenario has the twist of the very limited territories of just the north where the dwarves would have been at that time, but most of Mirkwood, all of Erebor, and various locations like Lothlorien, Isengard, Rivendell, virtually all of Eriador, and all of the east, and many other territories are all off limits. You can see there are wide swaths of areas I cannot select. You can see here that of all territories from Mirkwood Forest from the other scenarios that just the one territory is playable. A great feature which could easily go unnoticed is that two territories from the other scenarios are now completely replaced. There was the High Pass in the north and Caradhras in the south, but they are now Foundations of Stone and Silvertine, both of which are great ways of showing how the United Dwarves fought many battles deep underground during this long war. The original territories are both pretty similar, passes high up in the snowy regions of the Misty Mountains. The northern one comes from the Hobbit, leading from Rivendell to the northwestern extreme of Wilderland, and is very close to Goblin Town. You'll notice it's not the film version of the High Pass, but an original version done by the vanilla BFME developers long before the films. Its replacement, the Foundations of Stone, is a vast subterranean region at the roots of the northern mountains done by the Age of the Ring developers. It's akin to where Gollum dwells, and probably not far at all from that spot. The name of it is interesting. For those who know the film soundtracks well, it's the name of the track for the opening music of The Two Towers. Caradhras, of course, is from the Lord of the Rings books and films, another pass high in the mountains, leading from the area around the ancient elven ruins of Eregion west of the mountains to nearby Lothlorien on the eastern side. This is where in the books a spirit of the mountain dwells, which is responsible for the extreme snow the Fellowship gets pushed back by, not Saruman as in the films. A beautiful location and done by the vanilla BFME developers. Its replacement, called the Silvertine, is supposed to be one of the dwarven mines that gathered Mithril. The mine lies deep beneath the mountain it was named after. Made by the developers of the Age of the Ring mod, it's a worthy replacement to bring the underworld of the dwarves to life for this scenario. Another fun detail is that the Dwarven Heroes you get all start in their historic locations. Thorin was in Dunland when the dwarves started to rally, Dane was in the Iron Hills, and others were scattered in various lands to the north and south of Erebor after the dragon. So these are not random places for your starting locations. Great detail. Some liberties were taken based on some gaps in our knowledge. For instance, we don't really know where Dwalin specifically went during this time, or for that matter Thrain or Balin, but it's perfectly reasonable Dwalin would have been close to Thorin, and that for various reasons Thrain and Balin may have been east of Mirkwood. Another nice little nod to the history going on behind the scenes is the refugees from Dale. The men of Dale, of the people of Girion especially, would have been looking to make a new home, so you get the men of Dale, and you have the option of taking the territory of Esgaroth on the Long Lake, where they would resettle. Otherwise, you'll notice that it's almost exclusively Dwarven units now. No other Manish unit, except those you can get from inns and RTS battles, can be recruited, which is a major departure from the Dwarves Skirmish and other War of the Ring versions. You can see here that even in RTS battles, your default units are only dwarves. More on this kind of limitation later in the series, though. You can see the Goblins get their one and only new hero, Azog. More on him later, though. But there is only one new unit in this whole scenario, which is for the Goblins faction, the Hobgoblin Plunderers. You only get these two, so you gotta really watch these guys. But you can see they are labeled as hero units. I could be wrong, but I think they are the only heroic units you can get on the Living World map in AOTR in any War of the Ring scenario. Needless to say, they are incredibly powerful units. The design of these guys is really cool. Being called plunderers, the idea behind them is that they have plundered the dwarven cities and halls of all their armor and weapons to use for themselves, so they're in this really cool looking mix of an orc-like unit and dwarves. Fun fact, the term Hobgoblin only appears one time in all of Tolkien's Legendarium. It comes from the Hobbit in the chapter Queer Lodgings, in which Gandalf says that the Grey Mountains are simply stiff with goblins, hobgoblins, and orcs of the worst description. Interestingly, Tolkien himself comments on this word decades later in one of his letters towards the end of his life, commenting that his description was opposite the original truth, which is to say, in old myths, that hobgoblins were diminutive. This scenario is one of the only places in the whole game you can play this unit. The only other one is in skirmish mode, under the map called Alternate Faction Shadow and Flame, which lets you play an alternate version of the Misty Mountains faction, wherein you get some other new units, like the Moria Orc Shaman, and you can use the Balrog itself as a playable hero. The other heroes you can get are the same as from the normal skirmish version of the faction, so I don't need to get into any details on those. I'll go into the details of what could be going on with these heroes' odd inclusion given the time period later in the video, though. And of course, you get some of the great dwarf heroes from that time, such as Thorin Oakenshield, Balin, Dwalin, Thrain, and even King Thror himself. There is also the bonus of having Dane Ironfoot as well. For those who know the books well, this is a beautiful detail. For those who know only the films, it will surprise you to know that the story of the wars with Azog and the orcs in the books has Ironfoot as a pivotal character. It was he who slew Azog at the end of the war, though he was but a stripling in the reckoning of the dwarves, being only about 30 years of age. In fact, the War of the Dwarves and Orcs could stand to be retold briefly here for those who don't know the books, as the films alter many important details. King Thror was not the only dwarf of import slain by Azog, and he was not even killed by him at the battle. It was long before, all while alone, driven by madness and desperation to enter Moria by himself, perhaps to regain riches lost, perhaps moved by the evil of the ring of power he bore before passing it to his son Thrain. Only one companion of Thror, named Nar, had accompanied him to Moria. Thror was determined to enter, though his companion begged him not to. His companion could only watch helplessly as his king entered alone, whilst Nar waited for his return. But Thror was captured by Azog and his orcs, tormented and murdered, with his head being severed. This corpse was then thrown to Thror's companion by the orcs with a bag of coins of little worth as mock compensation, and the name Azog branded on his forehead. Azog gloated that he was the perpetrator, and that he had let Gnar live for one purpose, to return to the dwarves and warn them never to set foot in those halls again. When Gnar returned to his people, he told the story. This is what sparked the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, which lasted for 6 long years. A war of vengeance which united not just the dwarves of Durin's line, but all the dwarves of the other 6 fathers from far and wide, to avenge the heir of the most beloved and eldest of all dwarf fathers, Durin. The War of the Dwarves and Orcs took 3 years to prepare for and 6 years to fight, during which time the united dwarven peoples routed countless orc strongholds throughout the Misty Mountains, often fighting in deep places beneath the earth, hunting for Azog all the while. It was at the end they came to Moria, where Azog dwelt, and fought the last battle of the war, the Battle of Azanulbizar. In this battle, Dane Ironfoot's father, Nain, was also slain by Azog. Nain was the lord of the Iron Hills at this time, and sending his forces late in the 6-year war against Azog, he eventually stood in single combat with Azog himself, after which eventually his son, Dane Ironfoot, avenged his father and slew Azog with his famous red axe. The dwarves then took Azog's head, set it upon a pike, and stuffed the bag of gold given by the orcs to Gnar into its mouth. It was then that Thror's son Thrain, the father of Thorin Oakenshield, tried to persuade the united dwarves to reclaim Moria, but the war, while won, had cost them all about half the lives of everyone, and the dwarves would not leave their own lands to settle in a foreign place. With only half their people remaining, the dwarves claimed they had fought the war for vengeance and vengeance alone, not to reclaim Moria. Furthermore, Dane Ironfoot himself said he looked into Moria after the battle and told Thrain that no one would ever retake Moria while Durin's bane, the Balrog, still lived, which he said would take a power greater than anything he knew of to destroy it. Thus the dwarves all dispersed back to their homes as Moria was left once more for evil things to infest. Afterwards, Ironfoot became king of the dwarves of the Iron Hills. Talk about starting in style! So having Dane as one of the roster of heroes is a brilliant touch which brings the books to life in some amazing ways. Great attention to detail. But getting back to the scenario. There is something odd which needs to be addressed, but for which I think there's a plausible explanation. You can see here that you can recruit all of the heroes of the normal skirmish faction, even though many of them, like Gimli, would likely not even have been born at this time. I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, there may be a hard-coded limitation with the faction of the dwarves. I'm not really too sure. It's possible that given how the faction works with it having 2 sub-factions that they couldn't disable these heroes. I'm honestly not sure, like I said. Regardless, it seems obvious to me that this scenario is clearly meant to be played with just the heroes who are out on the field of battle. You'll notice, by the way, that there are no images for the heroes already on the Living World map. Like with the Easterling heroes covered earlier in the series, if you lose these ones, they are gone from the game permanently. This makes this mode that much more challenging, even if a bit frustrating. Perhaps one more piece of evidence that there are some weird hard-coded issues going on, though. You can see here I've got Thrain and Balin about to get cornered by the enemies so that they have no retreat from this losing battle. And just like that, they're gone. You can't even bring them back at a fortress plot. However, there is some interesting fun to be had. You'll notice that there are 2 Danes. As you'd expect, yes, you can have both of them in play at the same time. Pretty wild. Here you can see the new heroes added to this scenario. Because of the much earlier time period, they're much younger, and this is reflected in their abilities, many of which are different from their skirmish counterparts. And you'll notice that many of those skirmish abilities are entirely missing altogether. The default skirmish version heroes will not be shown, since there is no difference at all for their abilities.
The ravens are returning to Erebor.
You'll notice that Thorin has the stances in the skirmish version which really make him a hero to be reckoned with, but which are gone from his War of the Ring counterpart. This again makes this scenario that much harder, a worthy challenge to be sure. Fun fact about this version, by the way, originally he was seen in earlier versions of AOTR to have the short beard, as seen in the films, but in later versions the developers wanted him to be more book accurate to the namesake of Durin's folk, the long beards, and appropriately gave him the great beard you see in the model and the portrait art. Love these details. You'll notice that the only difference between the skirmish young Dane and this one is that he does not get his boar mount. Literally every ability remains the same otherwise. And of course, King Thror has no abilities, given he's killed as soon as you start the scenario. And of course, you go up against a new villain, Azog, but not the film version. In this one, it's their own original version of the villain. Quite nice. And while most of the new heroes in this scenario are for the dwarves, if you play the Goblins faction, you get this all-new hero. He has a full complement of abilities as you would expect. By the way, you cannot play this Azog in-game anywhere else, but he is available in the AOTR Worldbuilder, of course, so you could include him in your own custom maps or scenarios. It's just so cool they took so much time and effort to make this fully realized hero, even if he is only available here. For anyone familiar with Worldbuilder already, here's how you can find this version of Azog and the aforementioned War of the Dwarves and Orcs heroes, as they are a little tricky to find. For anyone who isn't familiar with Worldbuilder but wants to learn more, I have a playlist of tutorials on that to get you started. For that matter, here's how to find the Hobgoblin Plunderers we covered at the beginning of the video. And of course, because they're in the game files, if you know how to mod, you can include them in your own modded War of the Ring or skirmish modes. I actually have a tutorial on doing this for War of the Ring if you do want to check it out. Fun fact about King Thror, if you wanted to use a better version, there is one available from the Battle of Azanulbizar campaign AOTR offers with a pretty hefty leadership. By the way, if you like this kind of deep dive and want more great BFME analysis of its mechanics, check out these series of mine. There's the Attribute Modifier series, where I break down in great detail how modifiers actually work, comparing the vanilla games to the massive overhaul the Age of the Ring mod implemented over them. I also break down the fire mechanic, concluding at the end of that series with a great talk on the mechanic from one of the developers of the game from way back when the BFME games were coming out. There's also the Stealth series, where I show how stealth really works, again comparing vanilla to AOTR, and the beginning of the unit analysis series with the Berserkers unit. I also have a growing library of tutorials on how to use the BFME Worldbuilder and how to mod, along with lots of great gameplay videos besides. This about wraps up this episode. The next video will be a massive one, focusing on the final remaining scenario, the Last Alliance. So much was done with that scenario to bring the Second Age of Middle-earth to life that if you don't know the Age of the Ring mod already, this alone might persuade you to take it seriously. So stay tuned.